Good evening, friends. It's Rabbi Newboard here. We are excited to be starting a new Masechet tonight, Masechet Shabbos. This will be our final Masechet in Seder Moed. We have done all the other tractates in this order. And we have left the first one for last. Now this Masechet Shabbos, is by far the longest in the order, with 24 chapters. Tonight's class is dedicated in loving memory of my dear mother, Rivka Bas Harav Shloimeh, Zichrono Livracha. We're going to jump right into the Mishnah, and lots of the laws in today's Mishnah will be discussing things that are of various natures in relation to Shabbos. So there's no real one theme to the first chapter. Mishna Aleph. Yetzias HaShabbos shtayim shein arba b'fnim u'shtayim shein arba b'chutz. Yetzias literally means the going out, but in the Mishnah's terminology here, it means the transferring of items between one domain and another domain. These prohibitions are divided up into two, which are then subdivided into an additional two, which means a total of four. Bifnim, for the person who's standing on the inside. Ushtayim shein arba b'chutz, as well as two that are divided additionally into four for the person standing outside. Now, I'm not going to explain further because the Mishnah itself will clarify what exactly this means. Now, before we continue, I should just mention that according to the Torah law, we've discussed this in Eruvin at length. According to Torah law, one is not allowed to transfer an item, an object, from a private domain to a public domain. Or vice versa, a person is not allowed to pick up an item in a public domain and then carry it into a private domain. These are the Torah laws. The rabbis have added on different rishuyos. The rabbis have further added prohibitions, and they have designated certain areas as a makom patur, other places as a karmelis, and there's a karpef area. So there are other areas in addition to the Rishus HaYachid and the Rishus HaRabim of the Torah. But in this particular Mishnah, we're talking about from a Torah perspective first. So, Ketzad, how is it two for the person who is standing on the inside? So the Mishnah gives an example of a ani, a poor person. The poor person is the person who's standing on the outside of the home, and the balabayas, the owner of the home, the homeowner, the householder, is the person who's on the inside. And that's the terminology that we're going to be using throughout this Mishnah. Ketzad, for example, says the Mishnah, ha'ani, the poor individual, oimid bachutz, is standing outside the home. Uvalabayis bifnim, and the homeowner is standing on the inside of the home. So to make this simple, they're standing at the window. We're talking about, I guess, at the first floor, and the homeowner is standing at the window of the first floor, and the pauper is standing outside at this window. If the pauper sticks his hand inside to the home, through the window, and he takes an object that he was holding outside in the public domain, and he puts it into the hand of the homeowner, alternatively, the person who's standing outside took something from the inside of the house, and he takes it out into the public domain. So now the homeowner was holding something in the house, and this poor person in this second case stuck his hand in, took it from the homeowner's hand, and retrieved it outside into the public domain. So he did a full malacha here. He has taken something from a private domain and removed it into the public domain. Says the Mishnah, ha'ani chayev, in these cases, the porper is chayiv, uval habayis potter, but the homeowner is exempt. Now, again, here the porper is chayiv in both cases. He has, when we say chayiv, when he says chayiv, he is responsible, meaning to say that if he has done this with witnesses have warned him not to do this, and he acknowledged the warning, and then he went ahead and did it anyway, so he would be chayiv skila, stoning, as is the law in the Torah for violating Shabbos. If he did it without warning or without witnesses, proper witnesses, so he would be chayiv karis. If he did this accidentally, karis is excision. If he did this accidentally, so he would be chayiv echatas, he would be responsible to bring echatas. This is what it means when he says he's chayiv, he's liable. But the balabayis, but the homeowner, is not liable at all, because in these two cases he hasn't done anything. He had an item, he had his hands open. In the first case, the porper put something into his hands, so there was no action that he had done. And in the second case, the porper took something out of his hands, and he had done no action, so he is exempt altogether. Poshet balabayis es yodai lachutz. Now, what if the case is reversed? If the balabayis, the homeowner, stuck his hand outside, and he put something, an item, into the hands of the porper, or alternatively, or he took something out of the porper's hands and he brought it in. So this is the exact opposite, the inverse of the previous case. Balabayis chayiv v'ha'ani potter. The balabayis, the homeowner, is liable, v'ha'ani potter, and the porper is exempt. And again, for the same reason, it's exactly the same case as before, just the opposite has occurred. The Mishnah continues further. What happens in a case, Poshet balabayis es yodei lachutz? The balabayis had an item in his hand, and he stuck his hand outside. And now the porper took the item out of the homeowner's hand. Alternatively, the balabayis, the homeowner, stuck his hand out, and the porper put something into his hand, and the balabayis drew his hand within the house. Shneim peturim. They are both potter. They are both exempt. They are exempt from a Torah law. According to the rabbis, they are not allowed to do this. But from a Torah perspective, neither of them have done a full transfer. Now, I want to clue you into two terminologies that we use in the Talmud. One is an akira and a hanacha. Akira means to uproot or to pick something up, and a hanacha means to put something down. According to the Torah law, in order for a person to be liable for transferring an item from a public domain to a private domain, or from a private domain to a public domain, the individual will have had to have picked up this item in one domain and then put it down in the other domain. These two actions are necessary in order to be liable from the Torah's perspective. And in this particular case that we just said, neither of them have done both an akira and a hanacha. Neither of them have picked something up and put it down in a different domain. And so therefore they would both be potter, they would both be exempt from a Torah law. Pashat balabayis es yodei lachutz. If the homeowner stuck his hand outside, and the porper put something into it, or he took something out of it, or he put something into the homeowner's hand. In this case, again, both of them are not liable from a Torah perspective. And again, the reason is because they have shared the responsibility. And from a Torah perspective, in order for somebody to be liable, they would have to have both lifted something up in one domain and then put it down in the other domain. And in these both last cases, neither the homeowner or the pauper have done both actions. In both of these cases, they have split the action. One has picked it up and put it outside, and the other one has removed it from their hand. Or alternatively, one has stuck his hand outside and the other person put the item into his hand. And so the person did not lift, in this second case, the homeowner did not pick something up in the public domain. Rather, something was put into his hands. Now, the second Mishnah changes discussion completely. I shouldn't say completely, but changes the discussion of what we were talking about, which is picking up and putting down items and the transfer of objects from a public domain to a private domain. Mishnah Beis, Lo yeshiv adam lifnei hasaper samach lamincha. A person cannot sit down in the barber shop to take a haircut samach lamincha. Now, what this means is that we're not talking about Shabbos altogether here. We're talking about a regular weekday, and this is Mishnah is going to talk about a bunch of things that you shouldn't do at mincha time. And the reason for this is, although this has nothing to do with Shabbos, it has to do with the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah is going to discuss things that you shouldn't do Erev Shabbos close to mincha time. So, and this is the way of the Mishnah. Often when we're going to, once we bring a subject up, we bring up other subjects that are similar to this, or in advance to a Mishnah discussing something, we will discuss other things that are similar to the discussion that's coming up in a little bit. So again, this Mishnah Beis, has nothing to do with Shabbos, only it's in preparation for Mishnah Gimel. So says the Mishnah, Lo yeshiv adam lifnei hasaper samach lamincha ad sheyispalo. A person does not sit down to get a haircut close to mincha time until he davens mincha first. Now, there's a discussion and a dispute as to what are we talking about. Are we talking about mincha gedola? Mincha gedola is earlier on in the day. It's called gedola because you have a lot of time to still daven mincha, and this takes place 1/2 hour after chatzos, after midday. Now, the mincha prayers correspond to the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim. And there's one time during the year, or there's one time during some years, I should say, that the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim was brought 1/2 hour after midday. When was that? So we had discussed this in Masechet Pesachim, much earlier on in our Mishnah studies, where the discussion was as follows. When Pesach falls out on a Shabbos, this means that the Korban Pesach must be brought Erev Shabbos. Now, Pesach, generally speaking, a person could slaughter and do all the things that he needs to do for food stuff on Yom Tov as well. However, when Pesach is on Shabbos, so being that Pesach falls out on Shabbos, we have time to slaughter and do all the preparations of our Korban Pesach before Shabbos. However, there is a rule that the Korban Pesach cannot be slaughtered and prepared until after the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim, after the afternoon daily Tomid sacrifice. So what happens on Erev Shabbos when Pesach is on Shabbos? So Erev Shabbos, what we're looking to do is we're looking to sacrifice the afternoon sacrifice as early as possible. And so when Pesach is on Shabbos and the slaughtering and the preparation is on Erev Shabbos, the slaughtering of the afternoon Tomid, the Tomid Shel Bein Harbayim, is brought in early as possible, and that is 1/2 hour after Chatzos. And so, being that that's the case, technically you could daven mincha anytime after a half hour after chatzos, and this is of course called mincha gedola, the great mincha, the big mincha. Again, because you have a lot of hours until nightfall. Now, there's also mincha katana, which is 8.5 hours into after daybreak, which is much later in the day, and then you only have a much shorter time to daven mincha. And so therefore it's called mincha katana. And so the question here is, which mincha is the Mishnah talking about? And this is a matter of dispute. Now, the Mishnah continues, Lo yikonis adam lemerchatz, a person should not enter into the bathhouse to take a full bath. V'lo levorski, nor may he enter into a tannery, even if he intends only to look around. He can't go into his tannery at that time because we're concerned that he will get distracted and see something that needs to get done, start working and get preoccupied with all his work, and then forget to daven mincha. Further, nor may a person sit down and begin eating a meal, lunch. Nor may a person sit down to adjudicate a case. We're talking about a judge here. And in all of these cases, ein mafsikin. In all of these cases, if he had already begun, he does not have to stop. Which means, not only if he had begun beforehand, but even if he was not supposed to begin, but he began anyway, without realizing. So, without remembering this prohibition, without realizing what time it was. So in such a case, he doesn't have to stop. And we can rely on the fact that hopefully, on the idea that hopefully he will remember to stop and daven mincha before it gets dark. Nevertheless, even though in all of those previous cases had he begun, he doesn't have to stop. When it comes to scholars, who are complete scholars, Torah scholars, who study Torah for a living, they don't have any other occupation. They don't go to work. Rather, a person, his Torah is his business. He's a person, he's a kollel studier. He studies in kollel. And we're talking about great sages of old who would focus on their studies in a very diligent manner. So, says the Mishnah, Maspikim likris kriyas shema, even though they have already started studying Torah, and they're studying Torah very diligently, nevertheless, when it comes time to recite the Shema, even such studious students of the Torah, Talmidei Chachamim, have to stop and pause to read the Shema. They must mafsikin l'sfila, but they do not interrupt their studies for the recitation of Mincha, Ma'ariv, or Shabbos, whatever it might be, for prayers, because their Torah studies take precedence over their prayers. So again, for the biblical commandment of the recitation of Shema in the morning and the evening, they would stop their Torah study, but for prayers, they wouldn't stop. So, as we mentioned before, all of this has nothing to do with Shabbos, other than the fact that it prepares us for the next Mishnah, which will have a similar discussion, and is discussing now for Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Gimel, Lo yetzei hachayit b'machtoi samach lachshecha. A tailor may not go out with his needle shortly before nightfall on Friday towards Shabbos. Why not? Shema yishkach v'yetzei, because perhaps he will forget and he will continue walking around. He'll go inside and outside, and meanwhile he's carrying a needle. Now it's important to note that a machar, a tailor, cannot even place his needle into his cloak, because this is a common way for a tailor to carry a needle. A regular balabas, a regular homeowner who's not a tailor, this would not be considered a normal way for him to carry. So even if inadvertently carried a needle in such a manner, he still would not be violating a Torah prohibition. But for a chayat, but for the tailor, this is considered a normal way of carrying, and if he were to carry his needle in such a fashion, he would be chayav b'chatas, even if he did it inadvertently. And so therefore, as it's getting towards nighttime, he should not go he should not carry out his needle with him. The Mishnah continues, V'loya lavlor dukul moisai, and the scribe. Doesn't matter what kind of scribe we're talking about here, a court scribe or any other scribe, should not go out with his stylus, with his feather or his pen. Why? Because he's used to having his pen with him, and so it won't be foreign to him. It's very common to him, and he can put it in his ear, because again, a scribe, this is a normal way for a scribe to carry out a stylus. So he cannot do this as it comes close to nightfall. Why not? Again, because he may forget about it and can carry from one domain to another domain while carrying this item. Now the Mishnah continues on a different halacha. Person may not delouse, remove dead lice from his clothing, or read la'er haner by candlelight. This is we're talking about on Shabbos. Why not? Because we're concerned that if he's going to do this, if a person's going to read by candlelight, he's going to be engrossed in his study or whatever it is that he's reading, and we're afraid that he will lean the oil wick towards himself, and it's Shabbos, and this will cause it to go out a bit, and this would be extinguish it a bit, and you're not allowed to extinguish a fire on Shabbos. Be'emes amru, Mishnah continues, indeed, they said, in truth they said, Hachazan roya hechanatinikis, a Rebbe, a school teacher, who's teaching children on Shabbos. So the children are not going to touch the fire. We're not afraid for them to read by candlelight because they're afraid of the Rebbe slapping their hands. So because they're afraid, they would never dare touch the fire. So the Rebbe can look and see where the students are reading, but he cannot actually start reading the words, again, because we're afraid he's going to get distracted and touch the oil wick. Similarly, there's another situation, and this has nothing to do with Shabbos. This has to do with a similar situation where a person has to be careful how he conducts himself, lest he get distracted and violate a Torah prohibition. Says the Mishnah, a zav is a male who experiences a stop up in his male organ, and he becomes tamei, ritually impure from this. It's not semen that comes out, it's like a doughy material that comes out of his male membrum, and so he becomes impure, and that's called a zav. A zava is a woman who experiences a menstrual type discharge. It's a blood discharge, but not in her time when she's anticipating her menstruation. And so a zava, a woman who experiences this on successive days outside her anticipated menstruation, this is called a zava. Now, we're not going to discuss too many details of this, but it's important to note that a zava and a woman who is a nida, a menstruant woman, a man is not allowed to cohabitate with such a woman, even if she is his wife, until after until after this period is over, and she goes to the mikveh, and then they can resume to engage in marital relations. Now, in any case, the woman is called a zava, and the man is called a zav. So a zav and a zava cannot says the Mishnah, even when there's a man who's experiencing a zav experience, and woman, his wife, is experiencing the zava, so now both of them are considered contaminated. Now, ordinarily speaking, a man is not allowed, when his wife is in the nida state, he's not allowed to eat together with her. When we say he's not allowed to eat together with her, we mean without some sort of distinction. So you'd have to put on a special placemat, or put some item in between him and his wife. And the idea here is to remind them that this is not a romantic dinner here. They're eating together, yes, at the same table, but they should not get too close and too carried away and then go retire to their room and engage in marital relations. So by placing a reminder, they're reminded that this is not a romantic dinner here, rather this is just a regular dinner where two people are eating at the same table, even though they're husband and wife. So now, in this particular case, both the wife and the husband are impure. Now the husband is experiencing a stop-up in his male organ, which is not conducive to marital relations. It would make marital relations painful in any case. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah, even in such a case, a person should distance himself with a reminder, with the said reminder that we were talking about, in order to, because we don't want to get a person used to the fact that his wife is in the nida state or in the zava state, and yet he's going and freely eating with her. So even in a case where he would not want to engage in marital relations, because he's a zav, he himself is a zav, nevertheless we make the normal distinctions that we do in cases of where the wife alone is a zava or in the nida state. Mishnah Dalet. V'yevu min ha'halachos shamru v'aliyos Chananya and Chizkiya and Gurion kisholu levakrei. Now, for the next set of Mishnahs, we're going to continue to discuss things that have nothing to do with Shabbos. Now, the story is like this: Chananya ben Chizkiya ben Gurion was a great sage, and he would study up in his second floor, in his aliyah, in his attic, his upper chamber, and he was doing that for a long time because he was trying to reconcile statements in the book of Chananya, and he wanted the sages to include this in the 24 books of the Torah. And so they had some issues, and so he was working on these issues that seemed to contradict other areas of the Torah. And so he was working on this mission. And so he basically secluded himself up in his second floor of his house, and that's where he would study. But there were times where other sages would come and visit him up in the study there. Now, it happened once that the sages went up there. Nimnu v'rabu v'shamay al Beisilo. They went up to visit Chananya ben Chizkiya ben Gurion, and they did a head count, and they noticed that there were more people, students from the Beis Shammai Academy, from the Beis Hillel Academy. Now we know that Beis Shammai was generally more strict and Beis Hillel was more lenient, and so usually the halacha goes according to Beis Hillel, but they will look to sneak in some laws that they felt important. And indeed, they decreed 18 measures on that day. Beis Shammai was able to do that, and they were able to do that because they outnumbered Beis Hillel. So here are some of them. Hey, Mishnah Hey. Beis Shammai Yemrin. Beis Shammai says, "Ein sheidim diyay v'samamonim v'charshinim ela kedei shiurim u'beidyoim." I'm sorry, before I said it, they don't have to do with Shabbos. Actually, they do have to do with Shabbos. He says you cannot soak dye, ink, or dyes, or vetch. Vetch is a food that was used for animal food, and it wasn't generally eaten by humans. And even for animals, you would have to be soaked in order for it to be edible by the animals. So now Beis Shammai says that you can't soak ink, dyes, or vetch on Erev Shabbos. You can't put them in the vat in their soaking condition Erev Shabbos. Unless they will be completely soaked while it is yet day. Beis Hillel matir, and Beis Hillel allows for this. So just to clarify what's going on here. According to Beis Shammai is of the opinion that Shvisas Kelim is Deiraisa. Beis Shammai believes that it's not enough that a Jew does not perform a prohibited labor on Shabbos, and further, not only does a Jew have to rest on Shabbos, not only his animal has to rest on Shabbos, meaning to say that you're not allowed to have your animal rest on Shabbos. Of course, this is clearly said in the Torah, but according to Beis Shammai, even your vessels cannot work on Shabbos. So now, what the Mishnah is telling us here is that Beis Shammai holds that if you're going to soak vetch, or if you're going to make dyes on Shabbos, you're doing a creative labor on Shabbos, and you're not allowed to do that, even when you're not actually doing anything while it's Shabbos. Your vessel, your instruments are doing the work. You just set it up before Shabbos. Nevertheless, Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to do this. Beis Hillel does not agree with this notion of Beis Shammai. They say that a person and his animals must rest on Shabbos, but a person's instruments and a person's vessels are allowed to work on Shabbos so long as they were set up from before Shabbos. Further, Mishnah Vav, Beis Shammai Yemrim, in a similar vein, similar style Mishnah. Ein noisten inun shel pishtin l'seicha taner. You can't put bundles of flax into the oven before Shabbos. Unless there's enough time for them to become heated during the day. In other words, you can't put wool into the vat that's going to dye them before Shabbos. It's a heated oven, and this is going to dye the wool. So, unless there's enough time on Friday for the wool to sufficiently become heated beforehand, and then the process would have been fulfilled. So again, you can't put flax into the oven unless there's sufficient time. For it to become heated while it's still day. Nor can you put the wool into the vat to dye until there's sufficient time for it to absorb the color while it is still yet Friday. And again, why does he say this? Why do they say this? They say this because they say that even your instruments cannot be doing work on Shabbos. So Beis Hillel matir, but Beis Hillel, as we said before, allows for your instruments to continue working on Shabbos. Beis Shammai says in person, Beis Shammai says you cannot set out traps for wild animals, birds or fish before Shabbos. Unless there's enough time to capture on Shabbos. Beis Hillel matir, and Beis Hillel allows for this. Now in the Yerushalmi, in the Talmud Yerushalmi, it explains that according to Beis Shammai here, you would only be allowed to put out small nets that would be completely filled before Shabbos, or put out small traps that would be completely filled before Shabbos, because otherwise, what does it help that it can catch something before Shabbos? It's still going to be working if you put out large nets. The nets would still be trapping animals or fish on Shabbos. And so again, here, the reasoning is the same in all of this. According to Beis Shammai, according to the house of Shammai, your instruments also must not be working on Shabbos. but according to Beis Hillel, they may work on Shabbos. Further, Mishna Zayin, Beis Shammai says, Ein moichin le'evid kichavim. A person may not sell to a Gentile just before Shabbos. V'ein toyanim imoy, and he cannot load his donkey with him unless the non-Jew will get home before Shabbos. Ein magbiim alav, and you cannot load him up himself as well. You can load him with bundles. Unless he is intending to reach a close place. And Beis Hillel allows for this in all of these cases. What is the reasoning here for Beis Shammai? And the reason is because when a person sees this, it looks like the person is doing business with the Jew and he's doing work for the Jew. And so the person who's looking at this scenario is going to think that the non-Jew is being hired by the Jew. He's not selling it to him. He's going to think he's being hired by him to conduct commerce on Shabbos. And of course, that would not be allowed. And Beis Hillel allows for it in all of these cases, saying that we don't have to be concerned as to what somebody else might think in this scenario. So long as the Jew can finish all of his efforts before Shabbos, that is sufficient. Ches. Beis Shammai says, Ein neisten eires la'abdo le'kelim le'evid kichavim v'le'kelim l'cheves evid kichavim. A person cannot give hides to a gentle tanner, nor clothing to a gentle launderer. Unless there's enough time to wash the clothing or deal with the leather, process the leather while it is yet still day. And again, why not? Because then the non-Jew is going to be doing labor for the Jew, with the Jew in mind, on Shabbos. This is what Beis Shammai says, and Beis Hillel says that in all of these cases, in both of these cases, a Jew can indeed give the non-Jew leather to work or clothing that needs to be laundered while it's still daytime. And the reason for this is because the non-Jew doesn't have to do it on Shabbos. He can do it after Shabbos. And even if he does do it on Shabbos, he's doing it because he wants to get it done on Shabbos, not because the Jew needs him to do this on Shabbos itself. Tes. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Nagun. Hoyu beis Abba shayu neisten klei lavan lecheves evit kechavim shleishi yavim keidem haShabbos. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says that his family, his father's household, Rabbi Gamliel would give clothing to be laundered minimum 3 days before Shabbos, so that it's nowhere near Shabbos. And this was a stringency that they took upon themselves. This was not by any means the actual law. Now we're going back to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Both agree that you can place the beams and the beams of the olive press and the rollers of the wine press before Shabbos, which means once the process has already begun, and now we're just pressing the second press on to these items, onto the olives or onto the grapes. So this is not considered enough of a avoda, enough of a work that your instruments and vessels cannot be engaging in on Shabbos. So again, this particular case, it's not such. Your vessels are not doing a lot of work; they're doing a second pressing here, and so therefore, even Beis Shammai would agree that one may set this up on Friday and allow it to continue on Shabbos. Ein tzelin basar batzal uveitza l'kadesh yitzelin b'bayim. A person may not roast meat, onions, or eggs unless there's sufficient time for them to become roasted while it is still yet daytime before Shabbos. A person cannot place bread into the oven close to nightfall on Friday. Normally put a cake upon coals. Unless there's sufficient time for the upper surface, for the outside of it, to develop the crust while it is still yet daytime. Rabbi Eliezer says, so long as there's enough time for the bottom to crust, then this would be allowed. Now, there's actually a dispute as to whether or not Rabbi Eliezer is coming to be more machmer or more mekel, which means to be more stringent or more lenient. In other words, we're not sure as to whether or not the breads of those days, the crusts of the cakes, we don't know what crusts first, the inside or the bottom. Yud Aleph. Now we're talking about Pesach here. When, again, Friday is Erev Pesach and Pesach is on a Shabbos, so you can hang and lower the Pesach sacrifice into the oven near nightfall of Shabbos, and you don't have to, ordinarily we said that you have to be able to, it has to be finished roasting before Shabbos. Why? We're concerned that a person is going to start playing around with his meat or his eggs or his onions before Shabbos, while it's already Shabbos, because it wasn't sufficiently roasted when it's Shabbos. But when it comes to the Korban Pesach is a unique situation because everybody's around and everybody's going to remind him that he can't move around his Korban Pesach. He can only just take it out of the fire and eat it on Pesach. Again, we're talking about a Pesach that's a Friday night. And they can use wood chips on the fire for the fire in the Beis HaMoiked, in the fire chamber. The fire chamber was a place where Kohanim would warm themselves up. It was cold in the Beis HaMikdash. They were walking barefoot on the cold stone floor, and so they had to warm themselves up. So right before Shabbos, they can use the wood chips in the to set the fire. But in anywhere outside of the Beis HaMikdash, you can only set up a fire once the fire has taken hold of most of your fire setup. And again, we're concerned that once Shabbos comes on, what's going to happen is now you're going to start moving wood, and that's of course prohibited on Shabbos to increase the burning of wood on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says, when you're talking about a charcoal fire, so long, even if it's right before Shabbos starts, so long as you can catch some charcoal on fire, charcoal, once it gets on fire, everything else eventually, all the rest of the charcoal will get on fire. And so we're not concerned, says Rabbi Yehuda, that a person will go ahead and violate the Shabbos and start moving around the charcoal once it is Shabbos. And that, my friends, is the end of the first chapter of Masechet Shabbos. Please do join us again next week. Next week, Wednesday night is Pesach, so happy Pesach to everyone. We will, of course, figure out what the schedule is as we get later into the week. Perhaps we will have to wait until after Pesach to resume. Or perhaps on one night Chol HaMoed, we will offer a class. I'm not sure yet. In any case, a Chag Kosher for Sameach to everyone, and have a very, very good evening and a very good week.